Hi everyone, welcome back to Total War Therapy. I'm Alberto and today we're gonna see the full unit roster of the Ogre Kingdoms. I know I promised you the Skaven to come first, but believe me, I'm busy with a new job and this video already took me 12 hours, so I really cannot imagine how long it would take me to do the Skaven. Anyway, we're gonna analyze all the unit stats, the categories, how they perform in battle, and at the end we're gonna decide if they are a must to recruit unit, situational or niche, or just for fun. Hi, I'm Alberto, I'm a real person and here you will find the beginner's guide, the battle unit roster, tier list, ranking and many shorts, so if you wanna support the channel please consider to subscribe. Let's start with the legendary lords, and of course the boss of the Ogre Kingdoms is Greasus Gold Tooth. That many people were not happy with him being carried by a cart instead of a swarm of Gnoblars, but I have to say that I like this aesthetics. I don't know if I can properly define him a tank because he doesn't get a lot of armor and the melee defense is not that great, but to compensate that is a great damage dealer because he got plenty of weapon strength with armor piercing damage and anti-large bonus, then magical attacks for some reason, and the contact effect of the Monstrous impact that will reduce by 60% the speed of the enemies that are engaged in combat with him, and then he get access to a mix of abilities that are both to support the army and to support himself. He's not a bad legendary lord, a little expensive, but I definitely think that it's a good option. The second legendary lord for the base DLC is Scrog the Slaughterer. That is another very iconic character of the Ogre Kingdoms. In this case he is more a spellcaster than a melee specialist, even if you can expect his melee capabilities to be still great in close combat, but in any case he will get access to the lore of magic of the Great Bow. That there are, some offensive spells, some explosions, basically the great mode that is coming from the ground, and some debuffs and buffs. Then it can boost the Gorgers, that is a specific unit of this faction that we're gonna talk about later. And yes, I think it's a good mix because you can still fight in melee and at the same time you can cast your spells. That's why he's great and probably better than Greasus. That's why for me it's a must to recruit a unit. The third legendary lord that you can get only with the DLC Omens of Destruction is Golg Maneater. That is quite different, first because he's the first ogre on foot that we have, and he gets a lot of armor, a decent speed, the melee attack and melee defense are very high, the weapon strength is also very huge with armor piercing damage, anti-infantry bonus and a great charge bonus, and then he gets some abilities like the immunity to psychology, basically a beer that he can drink to replenish his life points, and at the end the Dead Eye, that is a gun that he can use every 2 minutes, that is great against single entities. Overall is another great option, and I think that in the campaign is probably the best legendary lord, not only for the mechanics but because you can really boost his characters over the skill tree, and for me is another must to recruit option. The only legendary hero that you can get with the DLC Omens of Destruction is Bragg the Gutsman, that even if he's a little big, he's a duelist and an assassin, so he's very fast with the mid armor, the melee attack and melee defense are very high, especially the melee attack, a good weapon strength with armor piercing damage and anti-large bonus, a good charge bonus, and then some abilities like one that removes the immunity to psychology, another that can execute all the lords and heroes with the life that is below, the life points that are below the 20%, and in any case it's a great unit. It doesn't have a lot of splash attack, so he cannot cover a huge area with its attacks. That's why you should focus on a single entity monster, on another character, a mounted character especially, and he's very strong, he can get even stronger in the campaign. That's why for me it's a must to recruit unit for your army. Now let's talk about the generic lords that you can get with the base game, and let's start with the Tyrant. That is the melee specialist version, so with a lot of armor, a decent speed, melee attack and melee defense quite high, a good weapon strength with armor piercing damage, the charge bonus, and then there are main abilities that you can get over the campaign, like the Thunder Mace that will cause an explosion, the Ars Belcher that is a vortex, a poisonous vortex that will corrode the armors, and many other things like the snack that you can use to regenerate your hit points. I think that is quite versatile. He doesn't support that much the army like the Ogre Paymaster for example, but I think that is a great option if you want to focus more on your melee capabilities. But since I prefer the spellcasters, for me is more a situational and niche unit. And then we have the Slaughtermaster, that is the generic Lord spellcaster of this faction. You will get access to 4 Lords of Magic, the Lord of Beast, of Death, of the Great Maw, and of Heavens. So there are many spells that you can have fun with, and I have to say that this is my favorite choice because it's easier to recruit a spellcaster Lord than the generic version that you need a special building. That's why for me it's probably the best one. Now let's talk about the generic heroes that you get with the main DLC. Let's start with the Hunter, that is both a missile specialist because he got this range attack focused on large entities that is very powerful, and then when he gets the mount, that is the only character in the Ogre Kingdoms roster that can get a mount, that is the Stormhorn, that is a giant tiger that we're gonna address later. With that he become also a melee specialist, so you can have the missile attack of a missile specialist and the charge and the weapon strength of a Monstrous. That altogether is a great mix. Then there are some abilities like the Bang Stick, that is like a breath of gunpowder explosion, and the Crippling Throw, that is a magic missile. You will just throw a giant spear that can be quite damaging. And yeah, overall for me is a great option for a hero. He is niche and situational, but at the same time is so strong that for me it's definitely a must to recruit unit. Then we have the Butcher, that is the generic hero version of the Slaughtermaster, that is the spellcaster generic lord. So if you don't get a wizard with your generic lord, you can still get the hero version, but you will need a building to do that, and you have to upgrade this building if you want more. So not my favorite choice, and that's why for me just niche and situational. And then we have the Fire Belly, that is the craziest generic hero. He's basically a spellcaster of the lore of fire, but you get in addition some other abilities, like for example the Flame Incarnate that will increase the melee damage reflection, the Eruption, that is an explosion that you can activate when you're surrounded by enemies, and then the Fire Breath, that is a magic missile that will incinerate the enemies. And then of course there are all the spells from the lore of magic of fire that are quite offensive, and yeah, it's not that great in melee because it got very little armor, and even if the melee attack and the melee defense are great, the weapon strength is lower than all the other characters except the spellcasters, of course. So yeah, something in the middle between a spellcaster and a melee specialist, and I think I really like it, but yeah, still a niche and situational unit for me. Now let's talk about the Gnoblars, that as you know they are quite a controversial topic for me, but let me know what you think about them in the comments. Now, they are basically the mid-shield of the Ogre Kingdoms that, especially in the early campaign when you don't have enough money to afford plenties of Ogre Kingdoms units, you need this filler to cover your army with, that is very cheap, easy to recruit. But at the same time they are expendable with a low leadership, so they will run away quite easily. They don't have plenty of armor, plenty of weapon strength. They are many entities because they are 160, but still, there are pros, there are cons, and from the mid campaign on I just stopped recruiting them, and that's why I don't have a good feeling about them, but I know that many of you like them, and I have to admit that you know, in the very early stages of the campaign, they are quite necessary, you know, to make your army more solid. That's why I will put them into the must to recruit in the early game, of course, unit. Now let's briefly talk about the Gnoblar missile infantry that you have at your service. Let's start with the Gnoblar Flingers. That is a new unit added with one of the latest patch, and I mean, they work exactly like the Skaven version, so they're not that bad. They're quite annoying, and against the right unit they cause more damage than you can expect, but still the range is very little, and for being in the Ogre Kingdoms roster, for me they are not that necessary. They are just annoying. So for me they are a niche and situational unit. Then we have the Gnoblar Trappers, that I definitely have a problem with this unit, even if some of you like it for some reasons, but I want to explain you my reasons. First is more than the double of the price of the generic Gnoblars, and they are, even if they are, you know, with the same stat, you're paying more. For which reason? Just because you get the Stalk, that, I mean, for a Gnoblar unit, I don't know how effective it is. Oh my god, I was charging the enemy and there is a unit of Gnoblar, what can I do now? And then they have the Vanguard deployment and this ability that will reduce the speed, the charge bonus of the enemies, but for only 20 seconds, and you can use it one time. So I really don't understand why should I recruit this unit instead of the generic Gnoblars. Then they have this range attack with a range of only 70, so what are we talking about? I mean, why this unit should be great? I know that there are many of you that disagree, but I mean, if I want a mid shield to absorb the charge and the enemy attack, you know, to then let my Ogre come in, I would still prefer the generic Gnoblars, not this unit. So for me, they are just for fun unit. Now let's talk about the melee Ogre infantry, and let's start of course with the Ogre Bulls, that are the most basic units here. They're available in 3 different weapon variants, and let's start with the first one that has very little armor, so you have to be extremely careful of range attacks and the enemies surrounding you. The speed is more than decent if you compare them to melee infantry, but there are actually some infantries faster than them. The melee attack and melee defense can look low, but believe me, with all the weapon strength, not armor piercing weapon strength that they have, they will still cause plenty of damage, and they have a little charge bonus together with the Ogre charge. So basically when the enemy is bracing, so is protecting from your charge, you will still have at least half of your charge bonus. That is great. Overall they're not a bad unit, and as a bread and butter for your starting army, for your early game, they're great, but yeah, for me there are better versions of them. That's why for me they're just a niche and situational. Then we have the Ogre Bulls with the dual weapons, that they just get the anti-infantry bonus, so they will be more specialized in charging and destroying bunches of infantry. For me they are preferable to the generic version because, I mean, they will be greater at the same purpose without sacrificing anything and just for a little higher price, but for me still niche and situational, and soon you will find out why. And at the end we have the Ogre Bulls with Iron Fist, that for me is the best version and weapon variant, because first they get more armor and a little shield that will protect them from the 35% of the attack, and then they get also an additional melee defense. Now I think they are the best version because you are gonna use them as your front line from the early to even the late campaign. Sometimes they are great, they are quite resilient, and they are more protected, as I said, from missile attacks, so they are a better front line. You can get still the mid shield of Gnoblars, but after them this is the best version for me. Then we have the Iron Guts, that are basically the mid-tier Ogre melee infantry, but they are quite different from the Ogre Bulls and the Maneaters, because first they have the best armor of this category, they reach 100, the speed is, you know, the same, and the melee attack and melee defense are quite in the middle between the Ogre Bulls and the Maneaters. Then they have the weapon strength with armor piercing damage and anti-infantry bonus and a great charge bonus. Now, the main strength of them is that they are recruitable with the basic building, so you don't need an advanced military building to take them. And this is great because you can get easily access to them, and with increased armor they can work in the same way of the shield of the Ogre Bulls with the Iron Fist, so you can be protected from missile attacks as well. And that's why I think they are my favorite unit. They are the right balance, okay, about the cost effectiveness and so on. That's why for me they are definitely a must to recruit unit. And now it's time for the Maneaters, that as you know they are the most elite troops of the Ogre Kingdoms, and you will need advanced military buildings to recruit them. Now let's start to say that their armor is less than the Iron Guts and not that much compared to the Ogre Bulls, but they have all the armor piercing damage. They are coming in 4 versions, and one of them is a missile unit, so we're gonna address it later. They have the immunity to psychology, and of course they cause fear, the Ogre Charge, and I mean they're just, you know, the enhanced version of the Ogre Bulls, so in the late campaign you can start to replace them with the Maneaters. But for me there are better versions, that's why this one I will put them into the niche and situational. Then we have the Maneaters with the Iron Fist, that they work in the same way of the Ogre Bulls, so they will get this small shield that will protect them from the 35% of the range attacks and a better melee defense. For me they are the must to recruit Maneaters because they are the perfect front line for the late game when you want, as I said, to replace your Ogre Bulls that, I mean, they're not that resilient in against very heavy armies. And yeah, they will still have the armor piercing damage, so quite versatile and perfect. And at the end we have the Maneaters with the great weapons that are quite the same. They just get an additional charge bonus, but they sacrifice the shield compared to the Iron Fist, and they get the anti-large bonus. So they are the melee, I mean the big monstrous melee infantry, more focused on the monsters, on the cavalry, and I have to say that they are exceptional at that. I think that every late game army should get at least 1 or 2 of them if you don't want cavalry or anything else. They're quite sturdy and they can deal plenty of damage, of course also to infantries, to characters, monsters, and yeah. Now let's talk about the missile Ogre Infantry, and the first unit of course are the lead Belchers, that, let's be honest, they are one of the most destructive missile units of the entire game. They are basically 16 giant ogres with these cannons that I don't know even what kind of ammunition they throw at the enemy, but it's very powerful, very explosive. They have a decent range of 200 and then a lot of missile strength with armor piercing damage. They're not that bad in melee. I mean, they will go down against a melee focused infantry, but believe me, against a low tier infantry or some cavalry they can resist quite well. And yes, this missile attack, it's terrible. I mean, when they are shooting at you, you just want to run away. And you know, they are not even that easy to debilitate from the enemy perspective. So quite resilient. They don't cost that much actually. So for me, is definitely, no doubt, one of the best must to recruit unit for the Ogre. And at the end we have the Maneaters with Ogre Pistols, that, I mean, the game considers them a missile infantry, but I don't know if they actually are. They have a lot of ammunitions, they have a good range, a good missile strength, even more than the lead Belchers, but definitely less explosive. And again, I mean, they are Maneaters, so they have many good features like the immunity to psychology, the Ogre Charge. They can fire whilst moving, and I mean, in the melee they are definitely great. So you have a melee unit with a more than decent missile attack, but I don't know how much you will use it, even because they perform better in the melee, engaged in melee. So if there is an enemy, you want to charge the enemy. You don't want just to, you know, shoot with your giant pistols. That's why, for me, even if I like the unit, okay, I mean, the lore, the idea, the concept is one of my favorite here. But about the use that you're gonna make in the fight, for me they are quite niche and situational. Now let's move to the Ogre Cavalry, and the first unit that we're gonna talk about is the Mournfang Cavalry. They are available in 3 different versions, and they are consisting of 12 entities that they are as big as a single entity, as a little single entity monsters, so they will be quite destructive. They have plenty of armor, a very decent speed for their size. Their melee attack and melee defense may look low, but believe me, they can destroy everything, and the weapon strength is very huge with a lot of armor piercing attack, and the charge bonus is impressive, so they can charge everything, they can even charge walls and break them. In any case, you have to watch out for missile attacks and characters, because they are the only troublemakers for you, but I mean, they are versatile against all the rest, so they are great against bunches of infantry, missile infantry, other cavalry, some monsters. And yeah, for me they are definitely niche and situational, just because the next version for me is better. Then we get to the Mournfang Cavalry with the Iron Fist that, as you know, they are the little shields for the Ogre, that in this case they will block only the 20% of the range attacks, so not that much, but they get also a little more of armor and a better melee defense. That's why for me this is the must to recruit unit. It's not that difference, but for a very tiny little price more, you can get the better version. And at the end there is the Mournfang Cavalry with the great weapons that they basically just get the anti-large bonus, so they are more specialized against the cavalry and the other monsters. In my opinion, they are not necessarily the best, because the Mournfang Cavalry with the Iron Fist can deal with the monsters and cavalry in the same way, and you will not feel that difference. So for me they are just, again, niche and situational. And then we have the Crushers. They are available in 2 versions, and they are one of the most powerful and expensive cavalry in this world. Let's start with the version with the Iron Fist. They get 130 of armor, plenty of leadership, of speed. The melee attack is greater, but the melee defense is the same of the Iron Fist with the Mournfang. And then the weapon strength is crazy with armor piercing attack, and the charge bonus is unbelievable. I mean, they charge better than a chariot. They don't have anything that special compared to the Mournfang Cavalry. They're just the most elite and enhanced version. Now, of course, they have also an excessive price. That's why I don't know if I should suggest them. The Mournfang Cavalry, they can already do a very great job, so I don't know if you actually need a overpowered cavalry that they don't have many other opponents in the game, but still, for me they're just a niche and situational. And then there is the version with the great weapons that they sacrifice a little of armor and melee defense to get additional anti-large bonus, but it's not gonna change that much. Of course, this is one of the best unit against the monsters and other cavalry and so on. They are very strong, but even the price is very high, so probably if you take in this case just the Mournfang Cavalry with the great weapons, you will not feel the need to get the enhanced version. That's what I think. I hope you will not get angry with me. Now let's talk about the artillery, and let's start with the Gnoblars scrap launcher that is great even if it's managed by Gnoblars. It's basically a single entity mobile artillery. You get quite a little of armor and decent weapon strength, even with, it's quite useless. You even get the armor piercing damage and the anti-infantry bonus, some charge bonus, but believe me, don't use it in melee. It's just a little more resistant in case you get attacked by flying infantry, for example. And also the speed. It makes it more mobile, but you should still be careful about where you deploy it. In any case, the range attack has an impressive range, and the missile strength strength is very high, but not armor piercing. So be careful of that, because if you shoot at heavy infantry, you will not cause plenty of damage. And there is basically one, the shot will split into different projectiles. That's why you will cover a wider area, and it's more accurate in this way than generic catapults that, as you know, I have a problem with them, because in the harder difficulty the enemies will dodge the shots, but in this case it will be a little harder. In any case, for me it's a must to recruit unit in case you are playing with easy difficulty and in the early game. And then we have the Iron Blaster, that is a huge cannon. In melee it's not that different, it just got a little more of armor and melee defense, but again, is quite resilient, but you should not use it as a melee unit. And then there is the range attack that has a lesser range than the Gnoblar scrap launcher, but believe me, you can feel the power. You will get this 1200 of missile strength, that is one of the highest of the entire game. You will get the armor piercing damage and the sundered armor, so you will reduce the armor of the enemies. That I don't know if it's that great. I mean, it's more for a support unit, but I mean, it's okay. In any case, it's quite destructive. You need to deploy it in a strategic position. For example, if you hit the flank of the infantry of the enemy, believe me, you will destroy the entire unit, even with a cannon. And then it's great, of course, against other characters, monsters, cavalry, and so on. So quite versatile, and for me is another must to recruit unit for your late game. Now let's talk about all the beasts and monsters in the Ogre Kingdoms roster. Let's start with the Saber-Tusk pack, that is a very necessary unit if you don't have the DLC, because they are the only very fast unit that can destroy quite easily bunches of missile infantry, artillery pieces, debilitate some characters, and so on. They don't have anything that special, they just have the rampage, so you have to be careful when they start to lose point, because you can lose the control of them. And yeah, overall they work like the dogs and the wolves in this game, so you have to deploy them in a safe position, and from there you can try to circle around the enemy and attack at their back the most vulnerable units. They are not that strong, so be careful of cavalry that can intercept and fight against them and destroy them, of course, but overall I have to say that they are a must to recruit unit. Then we have the Gorgers, that are a monstrous infantry, different from the Ogre Kingdoms, because they are, I mean, less ogre and more monsters. Basically they are only 12 entities compared to the 16 of the generic Ogre Kingdoms elite unit. They are quite powerful, but without any armor, so they are quite weak if they are under crossfire or surrounded by enemies. They are unbreakable, so they will suffer no drop of leadership. They have the sulk, so they can be moved, hidden all around the map, and you can use them to circle around against the enemy and attack from behind. The vanguard deployment to hide them in a forest, and the frenzy that will increase some of their stats when the leadership is higher. And the Gorger, that I mean, is just an attribute, because there are some abilities in the game, especially linked to Scrug, that can boost some of their stats. Overall, they are great against infantry, even heavy infantry, and I use them, but probably they are not that necessary. You don't strongly need them to build your front line, your army, but they can be very funny to use for your more advanced tactics. That's why for me they are a situational and niche unit. Then we have the Giant. Now, I generally hate giants, but if you, Creative Assembly, are planning to introduce in the game the Siege Giant for the Chaos Dwarfs and the Chaos factions, for me it's a great idea. In any case, this is just the generic giant that we already know, just more Ogre Kingdoms, so he's, he will get the wall breaker, the missile resistance, a lot of weapon strength. It's seriously a lot. There there are many characters that by default cannot even dream to have such a big weapon strength, and of course he's very slow with the charge bonus quite low. The armor is not that great, and believe me, they are a quite easy target for the missile attacks, so you have to debilitate all the missile infantry of the enemy before attacking with your giant. Be careful of this, but I have to say that especially against the chaos factions, or factions without any missile attack, they can be a very strong option, very resilient, very hard to take down from the normal melee infantry. That's why I think that in the right situation they deserve to be at least situational and niche. And at the end we have the Stormhorn, that is the main character of this roster, one of the most beautiful beasts in this world. I just don't understand why the legs are so tiny compared to the arms, but probably this is just my problem. In any case, he got plenty of armor because he's made of stone. The speed is quite decent for a beast of this size. The melee attack and melee defense are great, a lot of weapon strength with armor piercing, damage and the anti-infantry bonus, plenty of charge bonus, so you should keep charging your enemies, and then all the Ogre Kingdoms abilities like the Monstrous abilities like the missile resistance and the wall breaker. Now I think that for the late game is a very nice option, so I would define it a must to recruit unit. He's very powerful, and against other monsters is great, against infantry is great, so yeah, he deserves this place. And then you get the version with the harpoon launcher, that in my opinion it doesn't change a lot, because you're still gonna use this monster as a charging monster, and this is just an extra attack that can tear down some cavalry, some characters, but since you cannot decide where they're gonna shoot, for me, just like if it was an aura that will reduce deal some damage to the enemies nearby. But yeah, in the same way, so it probably in these circumstances for me is even not to recruit a unit, because the other only melee version is enough. Now let's analyze together all the units coming with the DLC of the Ogre Kingdoms, the Omens of Destruction, so you can decide whether to buy the DLC or not. Let's start with the generic lord that you will get with this DLC, that is the Ogre Paymaster. That in short, he's a support lord, so he's not that good in melee like the Tyrant, and he got no spells like the Slaughter Master, but to compensate that, especially in the campaign, you will get access to many abilities. Some of them are the headhunt, that you will put a bounty on the head of a character, so you will reduce his missile resistance and melee defense. Then the cash cascade and the glorious gold, that will increase some of the stats of your allies, and of course all the ogre features and abilities like the ogre charge, the wall breakers, and so on. Overall is not a bad lord, but if I have to prefer, I would still choose the Slaughter Master if you want a spellcaster, and the Tyrant if you need a very strong tanky character. So for me it's just situational and niche. Then you're gonna get the Bruiser, that is the melee specialist generic hero that we were missing in the base DLC roster. He's basically a very strong character with plenty of armor, a little shield, the weapon strength that is very huge, armor piercing and anti-infantry, and he got many different abilities that will boost his stats, the stats of the allies, and one in particular, the belly stance, that will give the expert charge defense and charge reflection to all the allies within range. That is very powerful, not probably for the ogre, but at least for your Gnoblars that will follow your army. I think that overall he's not a bad hero, and if you have, for example, a Slaughter Master as your generic lord, he's better to get a very strong character that he doesn't have spells but a lot of melee capabilities. So for me he's situational or niche. The first unit that you're gonna get with this DLC are the Pigback Riders, that are basically an enhanced version of the Gnoblars. They are fewer in number because they are just 100 instead of 160, and they got, for example, the shield, the little one, so they will be protected only for the 35% of the missile attacks, the anti-large bonus, and an ability that will increase the leadership and the melee defense. Now, this is my unpopular opinion, but since you have to pay the double of the price of the Gnoblars, for me they are not that worthy units, even because some of their abilities are not very important for their role. The anti-large attribute will be helpful if you have a faction made of humans, but your faction is mostly made of big ogres, and you know, they don't need this extra defense against the cavalry, and in any case, you know, against the monster they are probably the worst option. And then the shield. Okay, the Gnoblars don't have the shield, but they are, you know, more entities, so if you want to use a mid shield, they are probably better and at a better price. So for me, I'm sorry for saying that, and yeah, you will write a lot of bad comments, but for me they are, you know, not they're just for fun. Then we have the Golg Maneaters, that are the top tier version of the Maneaters, the most elite melee infantry of this roster, and they basically have all the abilities of the Maneaters, so the immunity to psychology, the Ogre Charge, but they get in addition the Vanguard deployment if you want to experiment some tactics, and then the Adaptive Tactics, that is an ability that will increase the melee defense and melee attack when they are losing in combat. Now, they have more armor than the Maneaters, that is for me the best attribute, and a lot of weapon strength with anti-infantry bonus. Overall, they are a great unit, and if you are building a late game army, they are a must to recruit for me, but still very expensive, and I'm not sure that compared to the Ogre Kingdoms, they deal far more damage. But we can say that for all the different tactics that you can use, for me they're still a situational or niche unit. The third unit that you're gonna get with this DLC are the Blood Vultures, that are basically these little birds, not that little actually, that is the same model of the Carrion of the Tomb Kings, but I appreciate that. They have very little armor, but the melee attack and melee defense are not that bad, not many entities as you may think, and of course they are very fast because they are flying. And then they get, you know, the Vanguard deployment and an ability called the Carrion Frenzy, that will increase the melee attack and leadership with each nearby entity death. Now, it's not enemy killed like most of the abilities that work in the same way, so it can be also your same allies, okay? They get stronger with the blood no matter who's coming from. And I like this unit. I think that they dramatically change the playstyle of the Ogre Kingdoms, because now you have a fast unit that can attack the missile infantry, the artillery of your enemy, and believe me, in the game you can feel the difference, and the fighting, especially against the Ogre Kingdoms, is not anymore the same after that. So I have to say that they are a must to recruit unit. The Yetis, another unit that we were really waiting for, and they're basically a Monstrous infantry, so not an Ogre infantry, but they work in the same way. We can make a comparison with Maneaters because they are at the same price, and basically they get you know, all the Ogre power, but without the abilities of the Maneater. So the immunity to psychology, the Ogre Charge, that is very important in this roster, but they get, for example, the Aura of Frost, that will reduce the speed and the melee defense of the enemies within range, and then, for example, they will get the magical attacks and the frostbite. The magical attacks, of course, are better if you're fighting against demons and, you know, units that have some physical resistance. They're not that bad, but you have to consider that compared to the Maneaters, they will get lesser stats, so they will be less strong in melee overall. For me, they are quite niche, because against the demons and you know, cavalry and so on, they can be good, but I would not define them a must to recruit unit. So for me, just niche and situational. And now the moment that you were all waiting for, because I'm introducing you to the big monster that is the main character of this package. I'm talking about the Thundertusk, one of the most expensive units in the entire game, and I can definitely say even one of the most powerful. Let's start to say that it got plenty of armor, a good speed that, I mean, is quite fast for a beast of this size. The melee attack and melee defense are great, with the magical attacks so great against the demons, the frostbite that will reduce the speed of the enemies, armor piercing damage, anti-infantry, a lot of weapon strength, charge bonus quite mid, but you can still keep charging the enemy, and then this range attack that it's just insane, with a good range that is 200, not the same of an artillery but better than a missile infantry, and you will basically create this giant snowball that is armor piercing, and again with the frostbite quite accurate and precise compared to many other artilleries in the game, and believe me, he will cause plenty of damage, and it's very hard to miss the target with this attack. And then all the abilities like the missile resistance, the chilling aura that will again reduce the speed of the enemies, that together with the frostbite will be a 60% of speed reduction if he's engaged in melee, so take advantage of that. And yeah, overall one of the best units, and even for its price I think it's a must to recruit unit. Now let's quickly see all the Regiment or Renown units and what's the difference between them and the generic version. Let's start with the Piggyback Knights, that are basically the Bretonnian version of the Ogre Kingdom units, so they will get better shield, the anti-large attribute, and a far better charge bonus. They will sacrifice the expendable attribute to get an ability that boosts their speed, and the Strider, so they will suffer no penalty caused by the terrain. And also, as you can see, the aesthetics resembles more the one of a cavalry of Bretonnia. Then we have the Gnoblars of the Mad Marshes, that are the Regiment or Renown version of the Gnoblar Troopers, and they basically sacrifice the traps to get first the poison effect, and second this ability called the Water Birth that will replenish their hit points when they are in the water. So you know, it's just a regeneration ability that can be helpful in very few maps. The Ashen Maneater is not just a regiment or renown, but he's also a completely unique unit that should count as official unit of the DLC. He's basically a single entity ogre that will work as a character. He's a mix of the abilities of the Maneaters, so the immunity to psychology, the ogre charge, and also the abilities of the Ashen from the Skaven, so he will get the Strider, the Vanguard deployment, and the Stalk, so you can move him hidden all around the map. That is crazy for a character of this size. Then he got a couple of abilities, one that reduces the speed, the armor, and the melee defense of an enemy, great if you are having a duel against another character, for example, and another that is kind of a smoke bomb that will disrupt the enemy formation and also increase your speed and your melee defense, that you can also use if you want to become unspottable. It's a crazy unit, and you should definitely try it. Then we get the Powder Guts, that are the Regiment or Renown version of the Maneaters with Ogre Pistols, that basically get all the stats increased, and especially the range and the missile strength, so in this way making the range attack more powerful. And as already said, you know, the Ogre Pistols of the Maneaters are not the best missile attack ever, and they will get this additional ability called the Adaptive Tactics that will increase the melee defense and melee attack when they are losing melee combat. And now one of the strongest units of the entire game, I'm talking about the Sky Striders, that are the elite version of the Crushers with the great weapons, that first they get the missile resistance that, believe me, for a unit, for a cavalry unit of this size is incredibly helpful, because you know, they are an easy target for missile infantry, for example. And then they get the magical attack and the frost Frostbite, that especially when they are chasing down a unit, they will reduce the speed. Overall, they are very powerful, and there are very few opponents in the game that have a chance to win against them. Then we have the Humble Peak Greybacks, that are the Regiment or Renown version of the Yetis, that first they will have some stat increased, and then they will sacrifice the weakness to fire, that is great, so you will not have this vulnerability, and they will get this ability that will increase some of their damage resistance and weapon damage when there is a terror causing unit in range. So they are very good against other monsters. And at the end we have one of the most beautiful units of this roster, the Snowhorn of Morn, that is the Regiment or Renown version of the Stonehorn, that as you can see hits the more icy and snowy version. Of course it gets the Frostbite that will reduce the speed of all the enemies nearby, and then it has a special augment that is called the Glacial Defense, that you can activate when you are engaged in melee, because it will increase your armor and missile resistance, but you will sacrifice a little of speed, so you will be a little less able to move, but far more resilient against missile attacks and against not armor-piercing enemies. Thank you for following me, and see you very soon.